Okay. For the people that just clicked on this video who are not in our meeting, I neglected to record the first 10 minutes of this, but thanks to Jason, I'm recording it now. Okay, good. We're good now. Right. So the picture brings to mind all these things, right? The corporeal physical body that you can touch versus the spiritual immaterial part of you that you are supposed to have, at least in mainstream religions, right? That's the idea of an afterlife, whether in heaven or in hell or whatever it may be, Valhalla, right? It's obviously not this physical body, because we know that that gets buried in the ground. So if you have any hope of surviving your death, it's got to be as some sort of immaterial entity, right? That's the idea. Questions about that? Now, one of the things, I don't know if this will come up later. I think it will. Yes, the last meeting is recorded, but it's in the module now. Good that you brought that up. I'm recording things differently. I'm using my own software, not software that I made, third-party software, to record these videos so that they'll be a little bit better and that they can last longer, that they don't disappear after a few weeks. So they are right in the module itself for this week. At this point, anyway, I think I just made it available. You should be able to access it. Okay, so no longer, and don't check for these videos in conferences. Check for the videos and the modules themselves on the main page for each week. So it'll say right now, it'll say Tuesday meeting is the one that's available. After this, I'll upload this one. It'll be the Thursday meeting video. Okay. I already have to take my jacket off because it's getting hot. Now, one thing to think about this popular idea of a ghost being the spirit that inhabits a person's body and that animates it. People don't go very far thinking about it, because on the one hand, they want to define that as an immaterial entity, because look, you can't find the soul with scientific instruments, can you? You could if it was a material being that occupied space. Right? But no, your body is amenable to scientific investigation, and we can find it with instruments. Can you find your soul anywhere? No. And the reason for that is given is that your soul is not a physical material entity in the spatio-temporal realm. It exists temporally, but it's not a spatial entity, right? It doesn't have dimensions. But there's a little bit of a double speak going on there, if I may suggest that, because, right, if you've ever thought about a ghost, or if you've ever seen them portrayed in popular media, they always occupy space, don't they? That cartoon version of a ghost rising out of a body, that ghost is occupying space. If that's what ghosts or souls are, then we would be able to verify them scientifically and empirically, right? If souls were actually occupants of time and space that we are able to observe, right? So these followers of Jesus were quite ready to see a ghost, right? They're like, well, we see ghosts, those are real. Well, of course, if you say that, then that means that ghosts are not immaterial or non-physical. It means they inhabit the physical world. It just might mean they're slightly see-through or diaphanous, or you can go right through them. But that doesn't make them non-physical or immaterial, right? Air, right here, this is all invisible and I can go right through it. But it exists as a physical thing. It exists in reality in physical space. So air is physical. It's a part of the physical three-dimensional world. And if a ghost was the sort of thing, right, if we thought of that as a soul without a body, if that were part of the physical world, you should be able to see it or measure it in some detectable way, some empirical way. So it's a little bit weird. We have this popular idea of a ghost that can somehow walk around and haunt places or communicate with you. On the other hand, we have to say that they're not immaterial, that they are immaterial. We have to say that they don't occupy physical space like other objects do. So I'm just going to leave that as a problem for you to ponder, right? How can it be both ways? If it's purely immaterial, there should be no way to detect it in the material world. If it has no sort of physical presence at all. and yet people think that ghosts are the sort of things you can have experience of and actually see in real life. Is that what people that believe in God and Jesus are? In Catholicism, there is something about that, but it has to do with the resurrection, right? So traditional Catholicism, that's often the case, is that you cannot cremate a body because your body is supposed to be resurrected at the end of time, right? So that your spirit maybe is in heaven for a while, but eventually you'll get your body back. And of course, if you cremate it, you can't do that. Well, which is of course kind of silly because let me not say silly, okay? Let me just raise the problem, which is that, of course, if you believe in an omnipotent God who can do anything, then of course God could just take the atoms of your old body, wherever they are, and put them back together. Shouldn't be a problem. But yes, that is why, that it is related to that. Yeah. But most Christians don't have that sort of issue. It's a specific thing in specific factions of Christianity. Yeah, but many Christians are not concerned about that at all. But it is directly related to this, right? Catholics don't like cremation because of the doctrine of the resurrection of the body. Yeah. Okay, so these are some themes, right? So this idea of dualism, we can see that within this picture because of all the things that are going on, right? Jesus is saying, touch my physical body. I am not merely a spirit. I'm actually here physically. I physically resurrected, and that's more meaningful than just being a ghost. And so we see this distinction between the spirit and the body, right? And this is a big theme in Descartes, and Descartes is really going to try to prove, to definitively prove that your soul is real and immaterial and immortal. Right? He even says that in the sub description of his meditations. Right? He says something like, in which the existence of God and the immortality of the soul is proven. Right? Even though he does not actually talk much about immortality of the soul, that it is implied. So Descartes is going to try to prove this dualism, that there's two basic aspects of reality. There's this everyday physical world that we can study empirically through science, and then there's this spiritual realm where we exist as souls or as spirits, and where God exists as a spirit, essentially. Of course, that gets complicated by the story that I just talked about, where God takes on a human body, and also in the story itself, God later on, as Jesus, right? Jesus, seriously, read the Old Testament, you'll see this story. I was trying to imagine what this would be like. After Jesus comes back from the dead like this, after a while, he's like, okay, I got to go back to heaven. And of course, heaven is up there, right? That's where the gods are, up there in the celestial spheres. Now, we don't think there's anything up there. There is no, we're on a round earth. Where are people in Australia pointing to when they point to grandma in heaven, right? They're pointing the opposite direction as you. So we don't think of it this way anymore. But when this story was written, people thought there's just one up, and that's where God is, right? So Jesus in the story starts levitating, and he starts going up and up and up like a rocket, just going up and up and up and out of the atmosphere. So if this story was taken literally, you'd have to imagine that people in Jerusalem were seeing this human body just floating up into the clouds and then disappear out of view. And then you'd have to wonder, how long was he supposed to keep going for, right? I don't know the reference. No clip. I don't know what reference that is, but I'm sure it's funny. Okay. So dualism is one theme in this picture, and doubt is the other one, right? Doubting Thomas. He's doubtful that this is, at first, he's doubtful that Jesus has come back in his body, because resurrected bodies, that just doesn't happen, right? Ghosts, that happens, but people resurrecting from the dead, that doesn't happen. Well, here in the story, the Jesus character is saying, look, I am here, I am real, I came back in a body. So doubt is going to be a big theme in Descartes, but not because he himself is very skeptical. He's going to use doubt. Right, this is very important. Very often people end up thinking that René Descartes was a skeptic. Now, to remind you what a skeptic is someone who thinks that knowledge is impossible. Okay? Maybe we haven't talked about that enough, right? Philosophy is a search for knowledge. A skeptic is someone who says, sorry, knowledge is just not available. That concept has no correspondence in reality at all. It's a made-up concept, and humans actually don't know anything, right? That's what a skeptic is. Now, Descartes will use skeptical arguments to bolster his case, but he's not himself a skeptic. Okay, so that's going to be very important that you understand that. He uses doubts and skepticism as a methodology for establishing truth, not for denying that we actually know the truth. So hopefully you'll get that once we get to it, but I just wanted to flag that before we do get to it. Descartes is not a skeptic. He uses what is called methodological skepticism to make his point. But he himself does not say, at the end of the day, we can't know anything. Okay? When he's all done, he's not going to say that. As part of the process, he's going to try to get you to doubt everything. But then eventually you're supposed to come out of that. Whether he does that or not, that's the big question. Okay? Okay. So enough about the painting. And we can skip through all this. We did this last time, looking at the historical context, right? A very important period where a lot of stuff is happening, a lot of changes very, very quickly, right? And this is why we call this period the modern period, because everything changed very quickly since the medieval period. All these different things happening, right? Central authorities overthrown, knowledge becoming democratized, our dogmatic ideas of what the cosmos must look like, all challenged by really good cutting-edge science, bolstered by technologies like telescopes, right? All this empirical investigation into the universe going on, overturning old ideas. And this is a big theme in philosophy in general, the way in which our increased understanding of the world around us challenges old notions, old ideas that we've held on to dearly for various reasons. Ideas like the soul, by the way. Now, Descartes is coming into this world, right? This world of conflicts. Suddenly there's conflict between science and religion, between the church and all these new free thinkers who want to keep investigating the world, who are not happy just to be done, right? Who are not happy just to rely on Plato and the Bible. And so their findings start contradicting the religious conceptions at the time. So there seems to be this clashing between science and religion. And part of what Descartes is doing in the Meditations is to show that that conflict is an illusion. Okay? That there really is no conflict between science and religion. That's part of what Descartes wants to argue. And people nowadays still often like to argue that. Maybe you've heard the name Stephen Jay Gould. Some of you may have heard of Stephen Jay Gould. He's a more contemporary thinker, and he had this idea of non-overlapping magisteria. Right? So the idea is science has its subject, and religion has its subject, and they are different subjects, so they cannot disagree with one another. Right? Descartes had the same idea. He thought science is about studying this physical three-dimensional world around us, right? This world of physical objects that we can take apart and analyze, and we can do science with it, right? We can use Aristotle ideas even, right, to think about the physical objects in terms of their shape and structure and their function and all that stuff. That has to do with the immediate physical world. There's all this stuff around you, the everyday world. Science can study that. And that's just about matter. That's just matter. That's all this stuff is. Descartes calls all this stuff around you matter. Three-dimensional stuff. That's matter. Science can study matter. That's its domain. Religion is about the spiritual realm, and that's an immaterial realm. It's not three-dimensional objects. Your soul or your mind, according to Descartes, is not a three-dimensional object, right? So it's not your brain, for example, for Descartes. Right? Your brain might be some sort of interface between your soul and your body, but it itself is not what's primarily responsible for your consciousness. Right? You see that this is a big claim to make, right? Neuroscientists now think quite a bit differently, right? But anyway, for Descartes, he's going to try to show that he can prove that there are these separate realms and that the mind or the soul just is not part of the world that science investigates. And so therefore God also isn't, right? And neither are any of the other spiritual or immaterial forces and realities that may exist. Those all exist in their own realm. Scientific methodology has only to do with the physical world. And so it can't tell you anything that contradicts with religious ideas. It simply cannot, because religion has to do with the immaterial realm, which all sounds nice. Of course, historically, that's not how it was, right? The Catholic Church was not just trying to make pronouncements about the nature of souls or God. They were also saying what the universe was like in general, what the shape of the world was like, right? How the cosmos was organized. So traditionally, right, people did not hold to this view, but Descartes, was looking forward, and he was trying to say, let's just keep these separate, right? Let's keep the spiritual realm on one side and then the scientific on the other one. And then, it's kind of an uneasy alliance he's suggesting here, because Descartes is deeply religious. He's a devout Christian, but he's also really into this new science. He's really into it, and he does amazing scientific work. He works on optics as well, which is the science of light, which was starting to get developed at that time. And like I mentioned last time, he did geometry. He's a perfect example of a Renaissance man, right? He was really into all this new stuff, into the new science, and he was deeply religious. And he saw this apparent conflict between the two. So he was saying, well, moving forward, why don't we do it like this? Why don't we separate the jobs, right? Church, can you please just talk about the immaterial realm, the spiritual realm, and then scientists will just talk about the material realm, and then we can all get along maybe, right? That was the hope. People still argue about whether that's correct, whether or not science can have any kind of impact on our religious ideas at all. Or vice versa, whether religion can ever dictate what you would think would be a scientific idea, right? Like the age of the earth or something like that, right? So you still have people arguing that the earth is about 6,000 or 10,000 years old, because if you look at the Bible literally, that's what you would have to think. People still think that, right? Yeah. Or there are also, in this what was called the New Atheism movement that happened a little bit ago, right? There was a lot of people trying to say, well, look at all this science that shows that various religious claims are wrong, right? So I'm not saying one thing or the other about it, except to say the conflict seems to still exist, and people still seem to try to get out of it by saying that they're about different things, like Stephen Jay Gould saying they are non-overlapping magisteria. Right? There's nothing to disagree about between science and religion because they are about different worlds. They're about two different worlds, right? This is why Descartes' view is called dualism, that reality divides in two. There's the physical realm, three-dimensional realm that we study with science, or just through everyday experience, of course, right? Don't ever think that this is about really weird stuff. I mean, it is, but most of the time I'm talking about ordinary objects around you, right? So this is part of that material realm that scientists study, and so is the human body. But the soul, the mind, the captain of the body, that is in its own immaterial realm for Descartes. But let's see how he argues for that, okay? We finished off right here. I didn't quite finish this. I did say Leibniz and Newton both co-invented calculus, right? Yeah, I did say this. I just didn't show you this. Geometry we already had, right? Geometry is about modeling reality in 1 or 2 or 3 dimensions. So, you can talk about a triangle, some imperfect triangle that exists in the world, and then you can do geometry and come up with these great truths about all the different triangles that exist. You can do that with geometry. But what if you wanted to model? Is everyone familiar with the word model in this way? I realize I use that word, but people might not be totally clear about what I mean by that. When I talk about science, I'm always going to talk about modeling reality. What science does is provides us with a model of what reality is like. So if you think of a literal model, for example, like a model of the Eiffel Tower, right? You have the real Eiffel Tower, the real thing, out there somewhere in France. But if you want to learn something about the Eiffel Tower, the real thing, you could look at a little model. You could look at a picture of it or an actual little version of the Eiffel Tower, right? And you can look at that. And so people created that model to reflect the reality, the real thing, the real Eiffel Tower out there. Scientists do the same thing with their theories. Their theories are abstract models of reality, right? And part of the technology of those models is mathematics and geometry, right? So scientific models are like that. They show what the world is like, right? They provide a little picture of what we think reality is like. And they describe this mathematically and quantitatively in such a way that you can measure it. A medium in which to perceive existence. Yeah, I mean, with some asterisks on that, I could go with that. Yeah. It's a way to think about existence. But when you have a scientific theory, I mean, look at something like evolution, right? It's a whole model. You read it and you realize, oh, okay, something like this happened. We're not accessing that reality directly. What happened over thousands or millions of years. We don't have access to that reality. We just have access to the model. And we want to know, does the model explain what happened? Does it make useful predictions about what's going to happen? Right? So a good scientific model, hi doggy, a good scientific model explains the nature of reality and it predicts things in reality, right? So for example, modeling reality over time, right? So suppose I have a ball and I throw it. We could create a scientific model of that. We could do all the equations. We could say, okay, suppose the ball is this big, has this mass, has this kind of surface. Suppose gravity is this. Suppose I'm throwing it with this much velocity, right? You put in all those factors, and then the scientific equations, the things that people like Newton came up with, allow us to predict what's going to happen. They allow us to predict how far that ball is going to go, and what sort of arc it's going to take as it's falling down. We can model all that with mathematics, and that's why Newtonian mechanics got us to the moon. Right? It was Newton's equations. Newton that came up with this hundreds of years ago. That's who we relied on to put people on the moon, right? Because we needed to figure out, well, here we've got this rocket, and we've got a rocket. Like 5-year-old. Okay, anyway, we've got this, and then we've got the Earth, and it's moving along its trajectory, and then the moon is moving. We've got all these moving parts. We have to make sure that there's enough velocity to escape the Earth's gravitational pull. How do we do all that? Well, we model reality using mathematics, and then we are able to predict what's going to happen. So we're able to know that if we use this much thrust at this time and have this much angle and leave the Earth at the right time, then if we go like this, then eventually we'll time it just right so we can go into the moon's orbit and land. Very complicated stuff. How are they able to do all that? They didn't just, get into their space car and try to look for the moon. Right? It does not work like that. You got to plan this all out ahead of time, right? Or it would just be a disaster. Now, they did it. And this all shows that, Newton was by and large correct at that scale anyway, right? Things get different in much bigger scales or smaller scales. That's why you need Einstein and quantum mechanics. But at this scale, Newton was totally right. And he was modeling reality, not just geometrically like that, but talking about objects moving in space and gravitational forces pulling on those objects and things like that. Talking about things like acceleration, like getting faster through time. How do you represent that mathematically? Well, Newton and Leibniz came up with this technology, calculus to be able to do that, right? So when I talk about modeling, scientific modeling, that's what I'm talking about. A theory is a model of reality, right? A theory is just an abstract model, right? An Eiffel Tower model is just, it's a physical object that represents the thing out there. A scientific theory is an abstract model that describes reality using mathematics, the language of mathematics. Okay, I hope that's kind of clear. Yeah, something like that, right? The trajectory of a ball given a certain force and a certain angle, then you're able to predict where it's going to go. It's amazing, isn't it, that we can do that? Yeah, we wouldn't have been able to do that without people like Descartes and Leibniz and Newton coming up with all that stuff. Okay. Oh yeah, so and then still finishing the slideshow, I guess, or this part of it. Something. So in 1687, Newton publishes his main breakthrough work, right? The Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. And notice what it's called, right? It's still called philosophy, even though Newton is at least the father of modern science. I called Aristotle the father of science, but Newton is widely regarded as, one of the most important figures in modern science. And one of these people that, unless someone like him had come along, we would not be where we are. And of course you could say, well, someone would have, and that's fine. But I'm just saying, actual human beings had to do this work for us to be where we are now, for us to be able to talk with one another over these devices. Right? It's mind-blowing when you think about it. People had to do the work of unlocking the nature of reality. It's pretty amazing when you think about it, right? And this all starts with that curiosity that we have as human beings that we saw in the pre-Socratics. Just this desire to look at the world around us and say, how does this all work? Notice you don't ever have to do that. You can always just go through your life and just try to survive. But people had to do that in order to actually figure out how reality works and how to unlock its secrets. This is a little bit of a digression, but it is amazing to me, when I always liked fantasy stories growing up, and I still do, and I always thought wizards were really cool. Because wizards, they're really wise, and what do they have that nobody else has? They have secrets to the nature of reality, right? They can unlock these hidden dimensions of reality and have these amazing powers, right? They can make wands shoot, they can make lights shoot out of their wands, or make frogs appear out of nowhere. Just crazy stuff that you couldn't normally do unless you really understood the hidden principles in reality. Well, that's what science is, isn't it? Science is real magic. It really is when you compare what we're able to do now to what people were able to do 200 years ago, right? You ever had a fantasy of time traveling and bringing your technology with you? Everyone will say that you are a wizard or a witch, right? That you know magic. And in a sense you do, because that's what wizards were always supposed to be doing, right? Unlocking the hidden forces that are present all around us. But being able to pierce through and then manipulate those things to do wondrous things. And this is what science has done. Not to say that you can't misuse it, right? There's also evil wizards, right? You got your Saruman as well as your Gandalf. Okay. Yeah, so I already covered this, right? It's his kind of mathematical models that allowed us to do this, to finally set step on the moon, which is incredible in of itself if you think about all the hundreds of thousands of years of human beings looking up at the moon and wondering what the heck is going on there and what it is, and if it's some sort of god or what, right? To actually go there. Amazing. Okay, now let's get to Descartes. How do I go through like 40 minutes just getting to this? Too many interesting things. Let me go through this kind of quickly then, the biography, okay? So we can get to the real meat. All right, so he was born in France, and this little town where he was born is later renamed in his honor. He gets his BA. He joins the army for a little bit, travels to the Netherlands. You'll notice in the modern period, a lot of philosophers like to go to the Netherlands because the attitude is a lot more tolerant there. And there's more Protestants there, so there's not as much influence from the Catholic Church. So a lot of people escape to the Netherlands to escape persecution. I'm from the Netherlands, by the way. I was born and raised there. Travels around a bunch. And he has this idea, right? He's still a young person at this point, sort of independently wealthy, I think, or maybe I forget exactly how he got his money, but he's able to sort of pursue his interests, which is a nice thing to do. And we've already talked about that, right? A lot of philosophy and science is the result of some level of privilege that you can actually take the time to do this stuff. But he traveled, he probably absorbed a lot of this new stuff that was going on. Now remember, this is pre Isaac Newton, right? This is before Isaac Newton, but still a lot of interesting stuff has been happening. Galileo Galilei, lots of mathematics, and Descartes has this vision. He just thinks, like, what if all of science, instead of being all these little subfields that all have their own methodology, and a lot of it is suspicious, and a lot of it is based on outdated thinking, based on medieval ideas. A lot of it was stuck just in old ways of doing things with bad methodology, not good scientific methodology. And Descartes thinks, well, I've seen the light, right? I understand how science works, and it works by this sort of quantitative approach, using mathematics to model reality in such a way that you can really measure and really pin things down. So we're not always just arguing about things that we can't settle empirically, right? Now we can argue about things that we can actually settle empirically, and by measuring and by using quantitative analysis, by using the technology of math and geometry. He writes this book for himself, sort of. He didn't really publish it then, but it's an early attempt at writing. There's this little story of him coming across a scientist who's doing some sort of scientific demonstration, and the scientist is saying science works inductively. Scientists come up with probabilities rather than certainties. And I actually agree with that. I agree with that scientist. Descartes disagrees, and he thinks he still has this sort of Platonic idea, right? Remember, Plato thought that knowledge has to be certainty, that it can't just be like 99% chance correct. You have to be able to eliminate all sources of doubt and uncertainty. Descartes agrees with that. He thinks that knowledge, and scientific knowledge as well, should be completely certain. Whereas this scientist, who was ahead of the game, I think, was saying, no, science just does not work that way. Science is an inductive process, and our conclusions are always going to be tentative and open to revision. That's how science works. Descartes disagreed with that. But Descartes, I haven't said this yet, or not today, Descartes was a rationalist. So you'd expect that, right? Rationalists want complete certainty for their knowledge. So then he finally ends up moving back to Netherlands, and he stays there for quite a while. He writes this big book called The World, where he tries to tie in all these different things. Very interesting stuff. But he doesn't publish it because, remember what just happened to Galileo, right? He does not want to risk it. Because one of the things he talks about is because he talks about the heliocentric model. And he doesn't want to risk it. Kind of makes sense. I mean, I would applaud anyone for doing it anyway, but it also kind of makes sense to, maybe you want to keep doing some work. Maybe you don't want to get killed yet. Maybe later on you can get this published, right? Right now, it did not seem like a good time for Descartes, so he just didn't publish it. Okay. I'm not going to go through all these things. The Cartesian planes, we talked about that, right? So in that book, the Optics, Meteorology, Geometry, and Discourse on Method, he talks about how to do science correctly. Sort of fleshing out that dream that he had earlier, this dream of a unified science. He's starting to sort of do that in that work. He's trying to unify different fields, and then he has this discourse on method, meaning how should you do science correctly. But then finally in 41, he publishes the Meditations. Okay, and the Meditations are what he's mostly known for nowadays, at least for the general public. People don't often read Descartes for his science, even though they might acknowledge his importance, and they might acknowledge his importance for geometry and math as well. We don't read him for that anymore, right? If you're going to read about geometry and science, just read a science book, right? It's a little bit different in philosophy because the Meditations is a more philosophical work, and this really it pays to revisit this, okay? And this is what was more popular among the general public. This is something that he published in French so that people could read it. And in fact, he circulated the book before he published it so that he could get responses that he could then respond to. Kind of a neat thing. It's imagine leaving a common thread open on your post, right? So you're letting people respond to you, and then you can respond in turn. So that's what he did. He published this book with the actual not a dialogue, with the actual text, and then some responses that he then responds to. He does it, and then he does it more afterwards, right? After he publishes it, lots of people have things to say. Someone condemns him, of course. I mean, if you're not condemned by a theologian at this time in history, what are you even doing? So kudos to Descartes. Okay. Okay, well, we're nearing the end of his biography. I'm trying to go through this quickly. Normally I'd go through this slower, but we've spent a lot of time already. Queen Christina of Sweden is one of the people that has read his book and his other works, and she's very interested, and you know, she's got some clout, obviously, and she invites him to come over to teach her some of his philosophy. And he does, but it may have been a fatal mistake, because Descartes is biographically, an interesting thing about him is that he liked to lounge in bed for quite a while in the morning. Sometimes wouldn't even get out of bed for a while, but start working. He'd start thinking and writing and stuff. But he's sort of a lounger, you know, sleeps in, gets up when he wants to, does lots of work, but he's not one of these people that rises really early and is really disciplined. But now he has to. Queen Christina only has time early in the morning. The rest of her days are full of royal duties, right? So she has some time early in the morning, and she meets with him in the courtyard where it's freezing cold. And Descartes, not used to early mornings or cold mornings, very quickly after this succumbs to some sort of respiratory infection and he dies. Okay. Okay, any questions about his biography or anything like that? Yeah, I know, it's a weird ending, right? Yeah. Should have never gone there. But what are you going to do when an actual queen invites you because she thinks you're so smart and cool? I mean, you know, it's tempting to say the least. Yeah. I'm just waiting for I see some comments writing, so I'm waiting for a sec. I'll keep an eye out. Okay. So some main themes that we're going to see. I already talked about this one. Dualism, specifically what Descartes called substance dualism. Now, remember when I said that philosophers use the word substance in different ways? Remember, Aristotle talks about substance. Aristotle just means anything that's a composite of matter and form, right? Here's some matter, and it's in a specific shape, and we can point to it and say, this thing right here, this cup, that's a substance. That's enough for Aristotle. Descartes' way of using the word substance is a little bit different. He means something like something that can exist in its own rights, that is not dependent on the other thing. So, the mind or the soul, for example, is a substance because it can exist apart from the body. The body or physical stuff is a substance because it can exist without some sort of soul inhabiting it, right? This cup can exist as a purely physical thing. You don't need a cup soul or anything like that. So that makes it a substance. So Descartes would agree that this is substance, it's physical substance, but not in the same way that Aristotle said. So substance dualism is a big theme. It's what Descartes is most well known for. The idea that all of reality divides into two categories, the material realm and the immaterial realm. And God and your mind are all in the immaterial realm. Two basic independent types of substance, right? Mind, non-extended something, stuff, if you want to call it stuff. Stuff already denotes, to me in my mind, sometimes denotes something three-dimensional, right? That's misleading, but we also can't say that it's just abstract, right? Mind really exists as a thing for Descartes. So how do you say that? They exist as a thing, but they're not extended. Oh, extended, by the way, just means three-dimensional. I prefer to use three-dimensional because we're all used to that. We know what it means for trusty cup to be three-dimensional, right? Descartes uses this language of extension. It just means it's extended, right? It's like when you extend something. What's the word I'm trying to think of? An antenna, right? You have an antenna that starts out small and you extend it. Well, anything in space is extended in space in that way for Descartes, right? So physical objects, the human body, everything in the natural world is extended stuff. But then there's a whole other reality, the mental reality or the spiritual reality, and that's a real thing too. It's not a mere abstraction. It exists in its own rights, but it's not extended. It's not three-dimensional. This is why earlier I was saying, when you think of a classic ghost that you see, a spooky ghost that kind of vaguely looks human, right? That would not be matter for Descartes. Sorry, that would be matter for Descartes, right? Because it's extended. So if you have a ghost, even if you can see through it or walk right through it, if it's occupying space at all, for Descartes, that counts as extended stuff, and that means it's matter. Which is why air is matter as well. It's extended, it's three-dimensional. Right? So anything that has dimensions in space is matter for Descartes. That's the way that he's using that word. So a soul, for Descartes, just could not be like that. You can't see a soul. Right? Souls would not be extended because then they would be matter. So the traditional idea of a ghost, of something that you can actually see that looks spooky, that would not make sense for Descartes. Now, he doesn't talk about this. I'm just putting two and two together because of his definitions. Right? Anything that's extended is automatically matter. So if you were to exist as a ghost in the world and people could see you, you would still be matter. You would still just be a weird kind of matter. You'd be like air or something, right? But there was lots of weird matter, right? That's not a problem. There's lots of weird stuff. So maybe ghosts exist, but if we're using Descartes' terminology and his concepts, the kind of ghosts that you can see would actually not be a soul. It would be some sort of material entity. It would be a material object, you know? In other words, whatever that ghost thing is, if there's any consciousness behind it, that consciousness, that mind, is itself not extended. Maybe it found some sort of other kind of body, a weird ghost body, okay? But you'd have to call it a body on Descartes' view. He has the idea that matter can be infinitely divided. Remember this contrast with the pre-Socratics, right? The atomists, who said that no, there must be some sort of ultimate little piece of matter. Let's call it an atom, right? The uncuttable ground level of material reality. Descartes doesn't think so. So it's pretty apparent that he has no concept of atomic theory, right? He just seems to think that matter is just this sort of basic stuff that can be infinitely divided. So in some ways, this sounds pretty basic still, like kind of like pre-Socratic stuff. Descartes thinks that there is no such thing as a real void or a real vacuum. You might question that, but really it just seems to follow from his definitions, right? So even if you imagine completely empty space, let's say I somehow emptied the inside of my cup. There's no molecules in there at all anymore. Let's suppose that. Well, it is still space. It's still three-dimensional space. This is still occupying 3 dimensions. It's still extended that emptiness. So even complete emptiness, if it's spatially located, for Descartes, that would still count as matter, right? Because it occupies space. Now, of course, this creates problems, and you can see how we're towing the line between pure abstract philosophy and actually something like physics, because then you do have to ask things like, well, how can stuff move around then, right? If all these air molecules are pressing up against me, and there's no empty space at all, how are those molecules moving around? There would be no space for anything to move, right? We'd have to be stuck in some sort of jello mold because every single space is completely occupied by stuff. Right? So that's a classic problem. But I would say that for Descartes, matter doesn't have to be some specific stuff. It just has to be extended, right? Okay, some confusing stuff. I'm just giving you the main themes. Okay. This idea that knowledge requires absolute certainty, we've already looked at. That's a hallmark of rationalist thinking. And this idea, I've already covered this as well, so I'll sort of go over it quickly, right? The idea that the physical world around us, we can model it using math and geometry. I.e., we can do science, but science has to be done in this quantitative way. This way that you can really measure things and you can create models that have predictive power and explanatory power. And he thought that you can have what is known as a priori knowledge of external reality. Now this reminds me, I'm using this term a priori. Next time I should have a little sidebar about some important concepts. I'll have a little crucial concepts sidebar so that you understand some of this terminology that we're going to be using. By a priori, he means you can have knowledge of external reality simply by thinking, right? Does that sound familiar? Yes, of course, right? This is Plato's idea as well. It's what rationalists think. Rationalists think that you can have a priori knowledge of reality. That means you can have knowledge of reality without relying on the senses, or at least going beyond the senses and using pure thought. Right? So you can have knowledge of what reality is like simply by doing a lot of very fancy thinking. And you can do that just at your desk without doing any sort of empirical investigations the way we think science does, right? Nowadays, we think of science as an empirical project where you have to actually measure things, go out into the world and learn through your senses. Descartes, as a rationalist, thinks that you can have knowledge of the external world purely through thought. One of the reasons you can do that is because we have innate ideas. Again, hearkening back to Plato, right? Now Descartes thinks that God simply put those ideas there directly, which, for the sake of argument, I think makes more sense than Plato's idea of reincarnation, just because that, like I said, that didn't really ultimately answer the question of where it started from, right? Here we forego that whole problem. When you're born, God just uploads a bunch of software into your mind that includes a bunch of knowledge about the way reality works. It's already in there. You just have to unlock it. Again, echoes of Platonism, right? Echoes of Plato there. Very similar. Well, they're both rationalists. One of the things that we can know like that we can know a priori about the nature of reality, because we have an innate idea of it, is God. Right? He thinks that anyone can simply look within their mind and find the concept of God, and that concept of God will be so clear to you that you will simply know that this being must exist. Yeah, that's going to sound doubtful to a lot of people, right? Unless you're one of these people that exists. Lots of people like this exist, people who claim to know directly that God exists, right? So maybe Descartes was just one of these people who thought it was obvious. But I think empirically we know not all humans are like this. Descartes seemed to have been a little bit overly optimistic that this is somehow universal knowledge that everyone knows. But that was his argument, and we'll get into that in a sec. And his famous saying, of course, "I think, therefore I am," right? Which has gotten sort of adopted as a slogan for various things, for the modern era, for the scientific era, for scientific skepticism, or for just rationality. That's actually not what it meant. It meant something very specific in his arguments, and we'll get to what that is. But right now, I just wanted to give you that famous saying. Maybe you've heard it before. I think, therefore I am. The Latin phrase is cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Which sounds like he's saying, oh, I'm all about thinking. Thinking is so cool, right? That's how people interpret it a lot of times. But that's not exactly how he meant it. Okay, so then let's finally get to it, right? I had you read Meditations 1 and 2. Hopefully you read it. It was written hundreds of years ago in a different language. It's gotten translated, so some of it may sound a little archaic or difficult to follow. But overall, I think Descartes is one of the better writers. Just wait till you get to Immanuel Kant. Whew, that's going to be a lot more difficult than Descartes. Descartes is actually pretty painless once you kind of get used to it. Published in 1641. So it addresses several problems, like I said, a tension between the church and these new materialistic sciences. It addresses skepticism, right? The idea of skepticism. Now, I told you, Descartes is not a skeptic, even though when you read him, it's very easy to think that he is, because he presents skeptical arguments. But he wants to undermine those arguments. He wants to knock them out, okay? Skepticism was a real thing, and it existed at least since Socrates, right? Remember, Socrates was famous for saying, all I know is that I don't know anything, right? Plato took that as a challenge. Okay, I'm going to know lots of stuff then. I'm going to apprehend these forms. I'm going to do dialectic and know stuff. But then there's a whole other group of people called the skeptics, who were also followers of Socrates, who took that to mean, oh, well, that's just the human condition. Socrates has hit upon something about us. Which is that we don't really know anything. Now, of course, that claim might already be self-undermining, right? How do you know that that's true? Okay, we'll put that to the side. Skepticism was a general problem. Since ancient Greek philosophy, there had always been people who said, sorry, knowledge is not possible for human beings. And there's also a lot of other kind of skepticism as well, maybe religious skepticism and things like that, right? So Descartes wants to address skepticism. He wants to say that, contrary to the skeptic, we can know all sorts of stuff with certainty, right? We can know things. We just have to be careful with how we do it. We have to use the right methodology. So he's attacking skepticism. I want you to keep that in mind, because it's going to look like he's a skeptic sometimes, but he's only using those arguments to try to get to some sort of solid foundation of knowledge that he can then build on. And yes, he's interested in what is correct scientific methodology. He argues for the immortality of the soul, the existence of God, and this old chestnut that I keep bringing up, right? Modeling reality through mathematics, the way that science does. So these are all big themes in his Meditations. So keep in mind the big picture, because there are certain moves in the meditations that are going to seem kind of weird to you, and you're going to wonder why he's talking about that. Okay, keep the big picture in mind. If you start thinking that Descartes is really arguing that you don't know anything, just wait. That's not what he's trying to say, even though it might look like that at first. So it starts out with just Descartes. If you read this, you realize that he has this sort of conversational way of writing. Right? He's almost talking to himself. Right? He's writing these little thoughts, deep thoughts with Descartes, right? But that's sort of a device, right? Sort of a writing device that he uses, right? Sort of pretending that he's talking to himself and thinking through things. But that allows the reader to think things through as well. Right? So he doesn't just present everything all at once. He sort of starts with a general idea, starts asking questions. One of the things he thinks about is, well, it is true, right, that you've discovered your own beliefs to be false or inaccurate. Has anyone not experienced that? Does anyone here think they've been completely correct about every single thing they've ever thought or believed? Someone might say yes as a joke, but I will not take you seriously. Yeah, no, right? Yeah. So that's just an observation, right? We do sometimes hold beliefs that even guide our behavior, right? Beliefs guide our behavior, right? This is something we talked about at the beginning of the semester. The ideas that you have about reality inform your decision making. Now, very often, the ideas that you have about reality are actually not correct. We know that because we often find out, right? So that means that right now, even, it's very likely that you have decision guiding ideas about the nature of reality that are false. How do you acquire false beliefs? Well, your reasoning could simply be wrong, right? You could have made a mistake in your conclusion. If you take a critical thinking class, you'll learn all about that. You know, you've got your starting premises, and then you come up with a conclusion, but maybe your thinking was all wrong. You concluded the wrong thing on the basis of those premises. Or it can be because those beliefs themselves are mistaken, right? So if you start with false beliefs and you build on false beliefs, you're likely to end up with more false beliefs. So in many cases, these false beliefs that you're walking around with are actually based on other false beliefs that you have. Problematic, right? So Descartes thinks, okay, well, I don't want all these clusters of false ideas supporting one another, right? It's a false kind of sense of reality that I have if I think that way, right? No, I need to get rid of these clusters of false beliefs that seem to be supporting one another. So to do that, I want to start over, metaphorically speaking anyway, right? To make sure that you're not going to walk around with false ideas dictating your behavior and your actions and your decision making. You're going to have to do some sort of deep cleaning of your mind, right? You have to somehow, you can't erase everything, right? You can't do that because then there's nothing left to build on. But maybe you can erase everything except for the stuff that is just completely for certain, completely sure. So that's what he wants to do. He's saying, look, if you want to grow as a person and be wiser and get rid of false beliefs, it's a good idea to do this little exercise. Why don't you go ahead and put out all your beliefs? Instead of just trying to figure out those false ones, that's going to take too long. Simply get rid of anything that's even remotely doubtable. Right? So you can see how he's using the methodology of a skeptic. He's basically saying, well, are there any things that you could say might be false, might not be true, things that you can't completely rule out? Let's suspend judgment on those. Let's not say that they're true just for the moment. right? All these beliefs that you're running around with in your head. Let's get rid of all the ones that even have a shadow of a doubt surrounding them. So then that way, right, the whole point is to get rid of those temporarily so that you can see what's left over. Right? It's like, think about getting to the bottom of a well, and there's a bunch of water in there. Some of that water is fine, but there's a bunch of gross stuff in there too. But you want to see what the foundation looks like. Get it all out of there. Get all that water, all the stuff out, and then you get to the foundation. Right? That's what he's trying to do here. The metaphor he uses is an apple cart, right? Say you've got a bunch of apples, and you want to make sure you're not walking around with any rotten apples that you might bite into or give to someone. Just dump the whole thing out. Just put back the ones that are good. Right? Leave out the bad ones. So, but first you got to dump them all out. Dump out all the ones that might have something wrong with them. So what kind of beliefs do you have? What kind of beliefs do we all walk around with, right, that you might do that with? Again, right, Descartes is reflecting on the possibility of error, right? That's what it started with. He knows that he is sometimes wrong, and that leads him to think, well, maybe I'm wrong about lots of stuff. So what should I do? Well, let me sort of see if I can start all over, get to a firm base. So then I'm going to cast doubts on all the beliefs that I have. What kind of beliefs do we have as human beings? Well, we have these two kinds. We have a posteriori and a priori. Remember, I just explained a priori. That means purely thinking, just thinking about stuff. So, for example, 2 + 2 = 4. That's an a priori belief, right? You believe that 2 + 2 = 4. You don't have to check. Right? You don't have to put two objects together to make sure, with two other objects, to make sure that there's 4 there. No, you can just apprehend that truth directly in your mind. An a priori belief. On the other hand, this cup has coffee in it is a posteriori. You can only know that through your senses. You have to actually check. Right? I can't simply think about it. Is there coffee in there? Without ever checking. No. Right? I have to do it a posteriori. So Descartes says your belief system, all the beliefs that are in your head are either one of those. It's either some sort of thing that you can know directly by just thinking about it, like 2 + 2 = 4, or all things are identical with themselves, right? Things like that, something like that. Or it's something a posteriori that you get through your senses, that you have to look at the world to verify that it's true. Those are the two kind of beliefs that there are. So he's going to focus on the a posteriori beliefs first, right? So a posteriori beliefs, right? It's just your everyday experience. You could include scientific work that's empirical in that as well. And a priori is stuff that you know just through thinking, right? Or that you've arrived at simply by thinking. And a big question, of course, is what is included in a priori beliefs? What are things that you can just intuit directly in that way, right? It's a big question. But for now, let's look at Descartes. Let's look at a posteriori beliefs. Right, beliefs that you acquire through the senses. We're kind of used to saying that, if you want sort of a paradigm example of what's real, people will go, this right here, this is real, right? This is real reality. Just I can see reality. Right? It's right around me. That's sort of your basic idea of reality in many cases, right? You think that that's the most certain you'll ever be of anything. Is that you're right there sitting in your room or wherever you are, right, looking at the stuff around you. That's your baseline of reality maybe. But Descartes is going to say that that's not the case. Right? For one, your senses do sometimes deceive you, don't they? Right? There's all sorts of optical illusion examples that you could think of where seeing should not be believing, right? Simply because you're seeing it does not mean you're seeing it correctly. Right? So even through the senses, you might have all sorts of erroneous beliefs simply based on phenomena that we now understand. They're mostly psychological, right? We understand that our brains and our eyes and our ears have to put together this complex picture of the world outside of us, and sometimes it goes wrong. Sometimes we get we draw a mistaken conclusion on the basis of our experience. Even something as simple as a hallucination, right? You hallucinate every day, by the way. Did you know that? If you're dreaming, you're hallucinating, right? When you're dreaming, your brain is hallucinating a reality for you, right? So that's one kind of way in which your senses can go wrong, or the illusion that kept the Catholic Church so dogmatic about geocentrism, right? Well, it looks like the sun is going around the earth. So but it's not, right? So if you were just to trust the senses, just purely in the moment, looking at a phenomena, you're very likely to get a completely mistaken idea about it. Right? It's very possible for that to happen. That's only the first step here that Descartes wants to bring up. This should throw your beliefs, your a posteriori beliefs, into some doubt at least, right? Because if the things are going wrong sometimes without your knowledge, might they be going on a lot more often than that? Well, Descartes sort of grants that, okay, well, sometimes they deceive us, but should we then think they always do? Well, maybe not, right? So this is only the first level of skepticism. It's easier to defeat than some of the other ones, right? But at the very least, Parker, that's right. And, when we get to Immanuel Kant, we'll talk more about that. And neuroscience and brain science, psychology, cognitive psychology all show that you're doing the same thing almost when it comes to everyday reality, right? There's a lot of work that your brain does. But certainly when you look at a computer screen or a movie, right, you have all these individual frames. When you look at an old-time movie strip, you see each individual picture, and then when you play it real fast, your brain just sort of creates this illusion of actual movement, right, when there isn't any. And again, this goes back again to Parmenides and Zeno. Remember, the arrow doesn't move, the same sort of thing. Right? All reasons to doubt our senses. But anyway, say that that's not that convincing. Say that, well, those are just exceptions to the rule. Usually I can see reality pretty well and not be mistaken. Okay, maybe, but here's a killer argument. Not easy to defeat. We probably talked about this on the first day of class because it's always kind of fun. But Descartes uses this as a serious argument to cast doubt on all your sensory experience. Why? Well, in order for you to know something on the basis of your experience, you'd have to know that your current experience is not mistaken. You'd have to know that your current experience is of an objective external reality and not just a hallucination that your brain cooked up while you were sleeping, which does happen. So how do you know? How do you know that you are not right at this moment? Let's keep it to this moment. Let's not talk about your whole life possibly being a dream, right? Like the row, row, row your boat song. Let's just suppose this moment right here. Can you eliminate the very possibility that you are simply dreaming? Now, to anticipate various things that people might want to say, that I don't want to waste your time, right? It doesn't work to say my dreams are not normally this normal or boring or consistent. My dreams are normally crazy. crazier than this, or kind of absurd or weird. That does not work because you're basing that on past experiences of dreams. This might be the very first dream that is very normal and consistent. Is that likely? No. Is it possible? It seems like it is. The other problem with doing that is that you're relying on your memory of previous dreams. But your memory itself might be false because it has been provided by your dream. Right? Within dreams, you can often have false memories about things. Right? Because there's just a dream memory. So your memory of your dreams normally being weird might itself be a memory created by your current dream. You follow? Other things don't work either, like people say, well, in dreams you can't read. Well, for one, I can test that. I think I have read in dreams. Two, this only again shows what has happened previously in dreams. That does not mean that it couldn't happen in the future. Perhaps this is the first time that you've had a dream where you read. And third, again, the memory problem. Anything that you cite as evidence that you're not dreaming right at this moment could simply have been produced by the dream. Okay, so given that, given what I just said, does anyone want to give an answer to this? Are there any certain signs? By certain, I don't mean specific signs. I mean certain knowledge, right? Is there any undoubtable signs that tell you that you are for sure not dreaming right now? And remember, those signs themselves, you must eliminate the possibility that those signs were cooked up by your dream. Yes, it is very similar to that, Parker. And the next one is going to be even more similar to that. Yeah. The next one is going to be the evil demon argument, which is like a Matrix type argument. Right now we're just at dreaming. Now, Kyle, that was really weird. I saw this weird phenomena where you looked like you were jumping all over the room. I might be dreaming right now. It's really weird. Okay, does anyone want to try? I mean, I sort of made it impossible, right? And that's the point. A dream within a dream. Yeah. You know, I think that those are just more dreams, by the way. I don't think it's a dream within a dream. I think you're having a dream, and then your dream continues, but somehow you have imagined that you're somehow in the previous part. I don't even believe in dreams within dreams. I think they're just dreams. It's just your eyes are closed, your brain is hallucinating. That's it. But in a certain metaphorical sense, sure. But the whole Inception thing didn't make a whole lot of sense. I like that movie, but there's a lot of movies. Once you study philosophy, movies get really problematic. Time travel movies, I have a hard time watching because of all the things I'm thinking about, all the paradoxes, and yeah, it kind of ruins it. So yeah, I'll give you a few people are typing, and this is a good time to just give you a second to try to think about this. And again, Descartes is not arguing that you are dreaming. And he's not even arguing that you're probably dreaming, right? If at this point in the meditations you were to stop him and ask, what are you saying about dreaming, Descartes? He would say, can you eliminate the possibility of dreaming, right? Is there a possibility that you are dreaming right now without your knowledge? Yeah, if this is a dream, then let me summon artichoke dips and chips. Well, first of all, that doesn't always work in dreams, does it? I've tried to summon things in my dreams when I've had a lucid dream when I know I'm dreaming, right? Doesn't even always work. Also, if you have done it in the past, then you bring up the memory problem again, right? Maybe you've dreamt in the past that you were able to conjure dream things in your dreams. But maybe this is the first time you've had a dream where you don't have that power. Yeah? Then the dreams we see at night are dreams within dreams. Yeah, and that's why I'm specifically am saying, because there's different ways of interpreting this stage, right? You could say, well, this is about the possibility that all of life is a dream or something like that. Then what do we call normal dreaming within that dream? Like, then it turns into a semantic issue. right? Then it's sort of like, well, let's just call this part of our dream being awake, and let's call that other part, that what you're calling a dream within a dream, let's call that a dream, like we normally do. But that's why I'm saying, no, let's not talk about whether all of reality is a dream. Just this moment right now. If it's a dream, yeah, well, here we'd get ahead of ourselves a little bit, Parker, but Descartes is going to say, for sure, you would know that it has to be your dream because you're the one experiencing it. Okay? So that's all it takes. So for you to be part of someone else's dream, you would not have any objective reality. You would just be a figment of their imagination, and you would not be having any experiences, right? For example, the people that you dream about, like, okay, let me put it in my perspective. Last night, let's suppose I had dreamed about somebody. That person in my dream is just something that my brain came up with, right? That person is not really having feelings. So if I meet you in my dream, I don't really have to worry about hurting your feelings, right? If I meet you in real life, I do, because you're really there as a consciousness having experiences, right? So you can't really be a mere figment in someone's dream, because then you wouldn't have your own conscious experiences. If you are having your own conscious experiences, this is actually Descartes' main point later on. If you are having conscious experiences of any kind at all, even if they're illusions, at least you know that you exist as an objective person, right? As an actual constituent of reality, and not just someone's dreams. Yeah, well, yeah, for sure, right? At the very least, your senses cannot be giving you the whole picture, right? At any given moment, you're sort of only seeing part of reality, if you're seeing reality at all. Right, yes, yeah. Yeah, that all works as well. But here, the dreaming argument is very powerful, especially if you simply limit it to this present moment. Can you eliminate the possibility that you are dreaming right now? If you cannot, then it seems to cast doubt on all your sensory experience. Because it means that for any of your sensory experience that you've had, or for any idea that you have right now, anything that you think you know, based on the senses, it might all be a dream. It might all be a dream memory. So this is why Descartes sounds like a skeptic, right? It sounds like he's really arguing for this, but he's not, okay? That's why I keep reminding you. We're just doing this right now as an exercise. So try to just sort of go along with it and say, okay, yeah, I guess I have to suspend judgment if we're going to do this exercise of anything at all, any belief that's even remotely doubtable. We have to sort of put to the side for a moment, like those apples. We'll get to them and we'll see if we can put any back. But for now, if any of them, there's any suspicion at all that they might be false, put them to the side. And the dreaming argument does that for all your sensory experience, for all the things that you know based on your senses. Those are all doubtable because of this possibility that you are simply having a dream right now. Yeah, so that's sort of, Parker, you're sort of like, well, let's really suppose the skeptic is right. What would that mean, practically speaking? And I think that's a really good question, and there's really cool philosophical things you can do with that. So I would just suggest you sort of think about that, right? Yeah, what implications would that have? There are lots of problems surrounding language around this. Again, that's once we move into the 20th century, some light has been shed on this issue. But it's very, very, very tricky to talk about. It's very tricky to think about this kind of stuff. So those sorts of implications, I encourage you to think about those. For now, because we already have our plate full with Descartes, let's get back to just Descartes' main point here, right? Your a posteriori beliefs, right? The beliefs that you get in your everyday experience about the world, there is at least some reason to doubt them. They might be false. So he's not saying they are. He's not saying you should think they're false. He's not even saying you should be really worried about it. He's simply saying, well, is it possible If it's a check mark possible, then we have to push that to the side for the moment. Because again, we're trying to get to that undoubtable foundation where even the dreaming argument can't touch you, right? That's what we're trying to get to. The dreaming argument definitely, at least if we're agreeing with Descartes and following his argument, casts doubt on all your sensory experiences. So this would not work, right? I think I zoom in on it. People try to come up with signs that they're dreaming, but none of this stuff works. Check your watch or a clock. You can do that in a dream. Look at something else. You can do that in a dream. Check your watch or clock again, see if it's consistent. Maybe in the past, right? That's the whole point of this, is that we've learned through repeated experience that your watch is not consistent. It's the same sort of thing as not being able to read in a dream or being able to conjure various things in a dream. None of that works because it's possible that any of these things could happen in a dream. Even if it's not likely, it's possible. Yeah, right? That is weird, right? I mean, for anyone that really wants to say, no, I'm sure I'm not dreaming right now. Well, it's interesting because I've had dreams where I actually thought about that. Where maybe something weird happened, and I was like, that seems a bit odd. But everything seemed so overwhelmingly realistic. Like my brain did a great job coming up with a hallucination for me. It was so good that I, within my dream, thought, no, this is real. Okay? So, if that's possible, then it's possible now. Yeah. And that's Descartes' point. So, none of that is to say that therefore you can't ever trust any of your sensory experience. No, Descartes wants to bring us back to that. But he's saying for now, to do this exercise, we have to push any of those dubitable beliefs to the side. So any of those beliefs that you get through the senses, these a posteriori, it doesn't matter how many times I teach this class or say that word, I always stumble over it. A posteriori, any of those beliefs, you have to put to the side if you want to get to this undoubtable foundation. That's what we're trying to get to, right? So we're trying to get these skeptical arguments that really shake up all your beliefs and really get rid of all the non-robust beliefs, right? There's all these beliefs based on your everyday experience that are not robust enough to withstand the skeptical problem. We want to find out if there's anything in your mind that does survive the process. Well, what about a priori beliefs then, right? I mean, 2 + 2 = 4 is a nice example of something that we kind of think that's got to be true. We've got to be correct about that, right? That's kind of goes along with the whole idea that the rationalists had, right? Rationalists are after certain knowledge, and they thought you could get that a priori. Why? Well, because math is such a good example of that. Of certain knowledge, and mathematics is true a priori. So that seems like that should not be able to be doubted, right? I mean, even in a dream, if in a dream I see a cup of coffee and I say there's a cup of coffee there, if I really believe it, that it's there, not aware that it's a dream, and I think there's really a cup of coffee there, I'm just wrong, right? But if I'm dreaming and I say 1 + 1 = 2, I'm still right. It doesn't matter if I'm dreaming or not, does it? Because I know it a priori. I don't have to go through my senses. My senses are doubtable because I'm dreaming. But 2 + 2 = 4 is not a sensory statement. It's an abstract statement about something that I can grasp intuitively. And perhaps it's something that exists in this Platonic realm, right? Maybe there's some other way of thinking about it, but at the very least, it's simply, it seems as though the possibility of dreams don't seem to destroy mathematical knowledge. Right, so yeah, we've dictated that. You must mean something like we've given a specific meaning to those signs, right? one numeral and the plus sign and the equals and the two. We've provided the meanings for those. Yeah. Now, but this is a whole thing that mathematicians argue about, okay, whether mathematics is purely formal and analytic and ultimately just based on pure logic, which is the way that you would be saying it here. It's a purely rational or logical construction, such that math can actually be reduced to mathematics. So philosophers have worked on that, like Gottlob Frege, the father of analytic philosophy, believed that you could reduce all of mathematics down to simply logical statements or analytic statements. But many people have disagreed with that as well. So Parker, I'm sympathetic to that point of view, but that's not an uncontroversial thing to say. Plenty of people would push back on that and say that 2 + 2 = 4 is more than just a sort of an empty tautology that we've given meaning by giving it signs. For many people, this describes a fundamental aspect of reality. And yes, we could have used different signs, right? We could have said this in French instead. Instead of saying 1 + 1 = 2, I could have said 1 + 1 = 2. I'd be using different symbols, but the underlying meaning is the same, right? So it's that underlying meaning that I'm grasping. Someone might argue that way against your point of view, that it's simply stipulative, right? I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying this is a big debate, and you're taking a stance on it, and that's cool. But I'm saying there's a whole other... a different system and decimal. In the United States, decimal you're saying, not metric, sorry. But yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah, we could have done it all differently. But the whole point then would be, would the underlying reality would it still be talking about the same thing, right? If we can actually use mathematics to help us in the real world, you might argue, how could it be purely stipulative, right? If we can actually use these mathematical equations to get someone on the moon, how can you do that with a sort of an empty definitional tautology, right? It seems a little problematic. It seems as though these mathematical formulas that we're using actually describe reality, and that's what allows us to do these amazing things. So it's a little bit of a back and forth. But I do also see your point. People have argued that. So I'm not just saying you're completely mistaken, right? Just saying there's a debate. So anyway, here the thing is, it seems as though the dreaming argument will not touch a priori arguments, because a priori arguments do not rely on the senses at all. They rely on your mental ability to grasp some sort of intuitive truth. Well, then Descartes brings out the big guns. The evil demon argument, or the evil genius argument as it's sometimes called. People get really wrong ideas about this. No matter how much I try to say that this is just an exercise for Descartes, it's just an imaginative thought experiment, right? If scientists can do actual experiments, philosophers do thought experiments, but so many people think that Descartes is being very literal and that he's worried that there's really a demon or something like that. He's not. He's simply saying, hey, look, conceivably, you can come up with this idea, right? You could think that maybe it's possible that there's some sort of powerful being that has the ability to put false beliefs in your mind. No, he's doing this at a time when he couldn't use sci-fi examples or sci-fi examples like we have now to make the same points. So we can just do that instead. You can forget about the evil demon if you want. It doesn't matter how you set it up. We could set it up as a matrix type situation instead, right? Suppose that unbeknownst to you, you are actually a brain in a vat, right? That old thought experiment, you may have heard of it before, right? Imagine that you're hooked up to a computer that is feeding all your experience, right? Creating this cool world all around you, an illusion, of course. You would certainly be wrong about all your a posteriori beliefs, right? It would be like being in a dream all the time. Couldn't that computer, or whoever was in charge, also implant false mathematical ideas in your head? Because notice the psychology of what happens when I get you to agree that 1 + 1 = 2. You look at it, you see it, and what happens is you just kind of get this feeling, right? Isn't it a bit of a subjective feeling? You sort of have this feeling of certainty. You look at it and you go, uh-huh, checks out. I assent to that. I notice even in hypnosis, you can sometimes get people to agree to things that are outrageous, right? Because it's a matter of manipulating your psychology. So here, whether it's an evil demon or an evil scientist, right, or even God himself, right? We'll look later that you can't really eliminate that possibility either. Well, put a pin on that. Leave it. Either an evil demon, some very powerful being that is able to manipulate your psychology, or some sort of sci-fi scenario where an evil scientist is able to make you think things. Right? Maybe you're not even hooked up to anything. Maybe somebody snuck in and put a chip in your brain that whenever you hear or see the sentence 2 + 2 = 5, you look at it just like you would 1 + 1 = 2. You look at it and you read it and you go, uh-huh, checks out, yep. Can you eliminate the possibility that your psychology is not simply being manipulated like that right now when you are seeing 1 + 1 = 2? Descartes' going to argue, no, you cannot eliminate the possibility. It's possible that you are simply agreeing with these statements even though they're false. Because what is happening is this demon has taken away your free will to even try to figure this out on your own, and is simply making you think that it is correct. And making you think that you understand the meaning, right? So if we go back to that idea that 1 + 1 = 2, we know that what that means because we know what all the signs mean, what the symbols mean. Well, the demon is just making you think that you know, right? So even something like 1 + 1 = 2 or other a priori beliefs, at least mathematical and geometrical ones, if you can't eliminate the possibility that someone or something is manipulating your psychology, you can even forget about the really sci-fi examples. We know enough about the human brain that the human brain does weird stuff like that. That you sometimes assent to things that are not true. Sometimes I make very simple logical mistakes. I teach logic, and sometimes I just make an incredible blunder. Okay? Really simple stuff that anyone might have seen coming, and I made the mistake. So how do you know that something isn't just going wrong in your brain when you're looking at 1 + 1 = 2 and agreeing that it is true? Right? Okay, well, so it seems as though a priori beliefs, at least these mathematical ones and geometrical ones, could be false as well. Now, we're over time, right? I'd like to keep going just a little bit, but if you want to check out, if you need to leave and check out the rest of the video later, that's okay. I think I just want to go till 4, just so I don't get too behind, okay? So if you feel like leaving, that's okay. You have permission, but do check out the rest of the video, okay? So I'm going to keep going. So it looks like at least any of those kinds of beliefs, you have to also push to the side. At least that there's a slight possibility. Doesn't have to be that that's likely at all. It's just, can you conceive of the possibility that maybe you make a mistake about basic math? If you can, then that means it's a doubtable belief. And that means it's one of those beliefs that we ought to put to the side to see if we can get to a indubitable belief, a non-doubtable foundation. So get rid of those as well. Just, again, temporarily, right? As an exercise, draining the well to see what's at the bottom. Well, what do we have left? Right? Basically, now, realize everything that we've ruled out so far, right? Everything that we've put to the side. We put to the side all your everyday experience. You don't know any of this stuff, right? We don't know any of it as part of the exercise. Right? These are the apples we've thrown out. Okay, so forget everything you think you know about the nature of reality that you've gathered through your everyday experience. Your everyday experience is out. You don't know if any of this stuff is really real. Your mathematical knowledge is out as well. You don't even know that 1 + 1 = 2. You don't know any of this stuff. What is left after that? Right? Once you've eliminated all the stuff around you, and even your own body, right? We didn't even get to that. Your own body might not even exist, right? If you are a brain in a vat, for example, the computer scientist or the computer could have created this whole reality for you, including your body. But your body is actually just this computer simulation. Right? So all of that stuff is in doubt, right? So not just the room around you, but even your own physical being, your own physical body might not exist, might not be real. So you can't even know that you have a body. You don't know that, says Descartes. You might simply be a spirit, or you might simply be a brain in a vat. You might be a completely different thing altogether that we can't even comprehend, but you are somehow having this visual experience of a body, even though there's no objective thing out there. These are all remote logical possibilities, and as long as they are possibilities, then you cannot be certain of them, right? So then is anything left? What's left after you eliminate your own body and the external world and mathematical truths? What's left? Well, now we get back to what we were talking about earlier, right? What about you as a conscious person who is thinking about all this stuff, right? You're following along as I'm doing these skeptical exercises, getting you to cast doubts on all sorts of stuff. But what about you yourself? Can you doubt your own existence? Now remember, we already doubted the existence of your body. That's quite easy to do because you only know about your body through your senses. And we've already agreed that your senses are not to be trusted for this exercise. Well, Descartes suggests that, look, if you are sitting there doubting everything, then you're sitting there doubting everything, right? Although not sitting, because sitting is something that your body does, right? So let's just say if you are there doubting the existence of everything around you, then at least you know that you exist. You see that? You cannot doubt your own existence, because to do that, you have to be there to doubt it. Right? So you've eliminated everything else, but you cannot eliminate the fact that you are having conscious experience. Right? So you can know, for example, that you are having an experience of the room around you. Right? You are having an experience of a room. That's true whether it's an evil genius making you believe that, whether it's you're a brain in a vat, or you're dreaming or hallucinating. You would know that you're having your current experience. Yes, right? You don't know if it refers to anything real, right? You don't know if there's really a room out there, but you do know that you're experiencing the room. So in order for you to experience the room, you have to be there to experience it. Right? You have to at least exist as a conscious mind who is able to have experiences and thoughts. In order to doubt any of this stuff, you have to exist as a doubter. You can do a basic logical argument, right? If I didn't exist, right? Say to yourself, if I didn't exist, I couldn't doubt anything. But I am doubting stuff. So I do exist. So my own existence is indubitable. Right? I know that at the very least I exist as this consciousness that experiences things. Even if I'm wrong about what I think about those experiences, even if I'm wrong to think that there's really a room around me, right? But at least I am having that experience. Yeah? Does anyone want to push back on that? I think the biggest problem here, okay, just so we don't spend forever on it, I'll just cut to the chase. A big problem is that Descartes already ruled out the a priori. a priori knowledge, which includes mathematical knowledge, but it also includes logical knowledge. It includes logic and reasoning, doesn't it? Right? Descartes' argument here, if I didn't exist, I wouldn't be around to doubt anything. I am doubting stuff, therefore I exist. This follows a logical pattern, okay, called the modus tollens. That argument structure has a name, okay? And it's a valid argument form. It means if those premises are true, the conclusion follows. But Descartes is relying on his idea of logic being correct. You see? He's trusting his own reasoning skills, which he didn't when it came to math. He said, it's possible for someone just to manipulate my psychology to think that my mathematical reasoning is correct. Well, if we're already allowing for that possibility, why don't you allow for the possibility that this same demon or evil scientist is manipulating your psychology to think that your logical reasoning is correct? Right? So I'm pointing out a problem in Descartes, is what I'm doing here, right? It's a nice little argument. I'm not sure if it works, though. I feel like once you've introduced this idea that any possibility of error destroys knowledge, well, what do you do then, right? Because then you have to you can't even trust your own thinking. You can't trust your own reasoning, right? That's the whole thing. If I can't trust my reasoning when it comes to math, if I can't say to myself, well, here's one, here's another, I count them, there's two, 1 + 1 = 2, right? If Descartes was right and we must doubt that because it's possible for someone to manipulate our psychology, well, why wouldn't the same apply to our logical reasoning? Right? If I go, well, I'm here thinking about it, so I must be. Yeah, I'm following these rules of logic, but how do I know that those are correct? How do I know that I can trust my conclusion based on my reasoning skills when my reasoning skills are just as susceptible to doubt as my mathematical skills, which are just a specific form of reasoning? So this is a famous problem Descartes creates, right? He's trying to get to a firm foundation of knowledge that he can just build on, and he goes on to try to do that, but many people have noticed that he gets stuck in this, what's called the Cartesian cycle. You can't really get out of this using your reasoning skills, because your reasoning skills are just as susceptible to doubt as all these other things are. Yeah. So it's problematic through and through, isn't it? But anyway, Descartes thinks that this belief, I exist, must be true whenever you think about it. Right? It's one of those things that you can know a priori, because in order to think it, you must be there to think it. Right? So it makes sense with using our ordinary reason, where we're not doubting our reason. This makes a whole lot of sense, doesn't it? Whenever you say to yourself, I exist, of course, yeah, that has to be true, because if you didn't exist, you wouldn't be there to say it. So it seems to just be a logical truth, but can you trust your own ability to recognize a logical truth? Once we've raised these skeptical concerns, it becomes very difficult to get out of this hole that you've dug yourself in, right? You're now at the very bottom of this well, and you've reached it, but is there any way that you can really get out? Then wouldn't we have to argue? Well, in what sense would we already know it, Marlo? What did you mean? No, okay, so your previous question. No. I want to get very clear about this. Marlo's asking, are we saying that only my consciousness exists and nothing else? No. He's doing epistemology, right? He's not doing metaphysics quite yet. He's doing epistemology, which has to do about what we can know, right? And he's saying, if we use these skeptical scenarios, we have to conclude that you can't know that anything exists apart from your own consciousness, right? So he's not saying that nothing exists beyond your consciousness. It is rather that when you're thinking through these skeptical scenarios, when you're thinking about the Matrix or a brain in a vat or an evil demon, you realize that the only thing you can know with complete certainty is that you exist as a consciousness, that you are a conscious being who's thinking and perceiving. even if everything you're perceiving is wrong or if it's right. Either way. What Descartes is saying is you don't know at this point that the external world exists, but you do know that you exist as a conscious being. So it has to do with knowledge at this point, not what exists. Now he will get to that, right? Because what he's saying has metaphysical implications. But right now, all he's talking about is knowledge. What can we know? And he's saying we think we know that the external world exists, and we think we know all sorts of stuff because we use our senses, but actually, that's all very doubtable, right? And we think we know things about mathematics, but that's all very doubtable as well. He's not saying that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. Right? He's simply saying that if we allow for the possibility of something manipulating our psychology, then it becomes very difficult to say that you know it, because it's possible that you're simply being manipulated into thinking that it's the truth. Yes, yeah. And so once again, right, Descartes is trying to take you on a journey. Right? The journey here is not the destination. Right? So all these skeptical scenarios, he does not want you to be stuck there. He's going to want to try to move beyond it. All I'm saying is he's going to have a hell of a time doing that if this is how he's setting it up. Right? So he's trying to go beyond skepticism. He wants us to say that we do know things about the external world and we do have a priori knowledge about mathematics. He just wants to make sure that we get there the right way, to put it on a firm foundation. And he thinks this firm foundation is your own existence as a thinking being. Right? This self. So, not talking yet about what exists. Once you go through these thought experiments and you've eliminated all knowledge of the external world and of mathematics, what are you left with? You're left with knowledge of yourself. You know that you exist as a thinking being. That's why he says, I think, therefore I am. That's his foundational truth, is the cogito ergo sum. Right? He knows that he exists as this consciousness. Does not know that a body exists, but he knows he exists as a perceiving, thinking being. And that's right? Imagine yourself in any kind of weird scenario where you're not sure if you're in reality or not, where you're really not sure, right? Let's say you're having some sort of existential breakdown, or you ate too many edibles, or you're starting to doubt the nature of everything around you. You can at least say, well, here I am freaking out. That's a foundational truth. You do exist there, freaking out, right? If you don't exist, then you've got nothing to worry about, right? So just think of that, right? So that there's a certain truth to this, that no matter what's happening to you, no matter how confused you are, if something really weird is happening to you, you can at least know, well, I am here experiencing all this weirdness. At least I know this much is true, right? That's his point. So he thinks that this is something that cannot be shaken by the dreaming argument or the evil genius argument. I'm saying it could be shaken by that because he's relying on logical reasoning. But this does raise the question, how much can you really suspend judgment on? Perhaps you need, if you're engaging in any kind of critical thinking or philosophy or anything like that, maybe it's just a base assumption that you have to be able to use reason and logic, right? How can you throw that into question without using it? This came up, I believe, in the discussion. Someone wrote about this, right? It is true. How can you really deny logic from the get-go? But if you've introduced the idea that an evil demon can manipulate your psychology, then it does seem to raise that possibility. Okay, very quickly, so let me just finish this page, okay? So now we get to the metaphysics. Okay, so all you know is that you exist. For all you know, all your experiences and your mathematical knowledge, for all you know, it's false. It could be, okay? But you do know that you exist. Well, what kind of existence is that, right? What is the nature of this I that you say, I know that I exist? When you say I, what does that refer to? Well, it cannot refer to your body, right? if we're following Descartes' reasoning. When you say, I exist, I know that I exist, it's not your body that you know exists, because your body is doubtable. It's something you only know about through your sensory experience, and that we've agreed to put to the side. All you know is that you exist, but you cannot know that you exist as a physical body, because that's something that's doubtable. But you cannot doubt the existence of you, of yourself as a conscious being, right? As a consciousness who thinks and experiences and perceives, even if those perceptions are all fake and illusions. You are having those perceptions, right? You're having conscious experiences. Even if those experiences are not physical realities, you exist as a consciousness. So Descartes thinks that this proves that the essential you, is an immaterial being, right? That you cannot doubt the existence of. It's one of these intuitive, rationalistic truths that you can just grasp with the mind directly, without the senses. You can simply know that you exist. So this is an example of an a priori truth, right? That's even better than mathematical truth or truths about triangles. Descartes thinks that this is simply something that cannot be doubted at all. You must exist. You know that, but you do not know that you exist as a physical being. So he argues then that proves that they are two different things. That the mind and the body must be distinct things, distinct substances. That's where he gets his dualism, right? The body, we think of it as a material, extended, three-dimensional thing, but we can doubt its very existence. You, however, the person that you are, you cannot doubt your existence. So it follows that you, the person that you are, is not identical with your body. It is rather identical with your consciousness, with your mind. If we think of the mind as your consciousness that experiences the world and that thinks about things. So what are you? You are, first and foremost, you are what you do, right? What defines you? It's the fact that you can have experiences and think. Descartes says a thinking thing. By thinking, he also means being conscious and perceiving all the things that the mind can do. All the things that you know you can do, even if everything else is an illusion, right? You know you can sit there and feel a pain. You know you can sit there and imagine something in your imagination. You know you can look around and see different things, even if those things don't really exist. You are still having an experience of those things. Right? So that, for Descartes, defines what you are as a soul, right? So for Descartes, soul and mind pretty much just mean the same thing, right? It's already a part of Christian theology to think of the soul as an immaterial thing. Even though biblically, right, we saw that they thought ghosts were extended. Put that to the side. The idea here is mainly that you as a self, the very thing that you cannot doubt the existence of, you are primarily a thinking thing, and you're defined by your ability to have consciousness, not by your extension in space. Right? Physical things, right? We don't know if they exist yet, right, at this stage, but just our ordinary idea of physical things, they're extended in space. Okay, your mind, your soul is not like that for Descartes. Right? You are a distinct being from this vessel, which for many people that strikes as intuitively true. Actually, a lot of people really resonate with that, especially if you have any kind of religious ideas, right? Where again, the idea is that your body will be buried in the ground, but luckily you get to keep existing. Well, how is that possible if you are your body, right? So you'd be on Descartes' side in saying that you are not your body if you believe in that, if you believe in some sort of afterlife. But you also cannot you can't have some sort of vague idea of a thing that's inside your body that can get out. There's that old urban legend about when you die that you lose a certain amount of weight and that's your spirit leaving. Complete BS, by the way. That's not a real thing. But even if that were true, that would mean that the soul has a weight and a mass, and that would make it simply another physical thing in the physical world, wouldn't it? So that's not what the soul or the self is for Descartes. It's completely unextended. It's not located even in space at all. If it was located, it would have to occupy space. If it occupies space, it's extended. If it's extended, it's matter. It's material, right? So your essential self, for Descartes, cannot be a physical object. You're a pure consciousness that is not physical, not extended. Okay, so let's stop there. So that's his foundation, right? We have not built back up yet. That's his foundation. He thinks that by taking these arguments, these skeptical arguments, putting aside everything that's doubtable, which includes all your everyday experience and all your mathematical knowledge, put that to the side. What's left? You. You exist. You don't know that you exist as a physical being. You only know that you exist as a conscious being, a mental being, a mind or a soul that has experiences. That's all you really know so far. That's the undoubtable foundation that he wants to build back up on. That's the foundation that he thinks can withstand those skeptical arguments that we looked at. He thinks that you as what he calls the cogito, right? The thinking self. You as a cogito are undoubtable. Right? The evil demon cannot touch that. Right. Yeah, that's his argument. Okay, we'll stop there. Thank you for staying late, everyone. I really appreciate that. I appreciate your commitment. Yeah. So we are a little bit behind, but this always happens. We'll pick up with this on Tuesday. And then we'll move on to the empiricists. We've heard a lot of rationalism, right? We've heard a lot of a priori kind of reasoning. And then we'll look at the empiricists starting next week. Yeah. All right, thanks everybody. I'll stick around for a sec and turn my camera off, but I'll still be here.